And welcome into this edition of Now and Next. Dave Trafford here with you. And as we like to say, we want to talk about what's happening now, but what does that mean coming next? And so I think by accident or design, our guest today, Richard Worzel, is an important guy to have on the show because, among other things, he is a veteran futurist. And you have spent some time. And you make it clear. You're not predicting the future here. You're talking about, we're looking at current circumstances, and then what are the possibilities, what are the risks, what are the opportunities that are on the horizon. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the way I describe it is I don't predict the future because the future is inherently unpredictable. There are too many elements that that combine with each other, that interact with each other, that it makes it virtually impossible to say what's going to happen next. Instead, what I try and do is help people plan and prepare for uncertainty and try and anticipate what could happen so that you've got some contingency plans in hand.
And I think given the way things have unfolded since January the 1st, 2026, you talk about unpredictability. And I have said before in the last couple of weeks, all of a sudden, Richard, we can almost eliminate the words, unlikely. We can eliminate the words that are unimaginable because in so many ways, things that were unlikely are happening. Things that were unimaginable now are really in front of us. And whether that's the world around us or the economy that we're looking at, whether it's what's happening in the United States, to call this unstable is underestimating or understating it, isn't it?
It is. And it's not something that's just happened overnight. It would be very easy to just put your finger on one individual, Trump, and say this is all due to him, that he's unpredictable, that he reacts as opposed to prepares and considers. But it goes much further back than that. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how far back to go, but we've been the Western world, the developed economies, have been storing up problems for a long time. The different crises, the internet bubble in around 2000, the mortgage bubble in the United States, all of the various crises that the Federal Reserve has had to deal with have all led the U.S. government to trying to paper over the cracks, and generally successfully, with the result that they have been pushing more and more problems into the future rather than resolving them. So this has been coming for decades, and it's been accumulating for decades. One of the biggest things that is not generally recognized is the importance of the global economy in this picture. The emergence of the global economy started in the early 1970s when the United States went off the gold standard and allowed currencies to float. That was the beginning of an acceleration of the emergence of a global economy because suddenly countries had to compete on the basis of how productive their industries were rather than the fact that they had a cheat exchange rate that allowed them to sell into the United States where the U.S. was in recession or a boom time. So what that did was it started to weld the individual national economies into one. And that was, generally speaking, very beneficial. It meant that countries started to do what they did best, and the global economy as a whole became more efficient, which meant people could afford more goods and services because they were less expensive. And that helped the vast majority of people, and more than 1 billion people were lifted out of abject poverty. But it also created a loser class, people who lost when their manufacturing jobs disappeared to lower cost jurisdictions. So factories left the United States and Canada and moved to places like China, Vietnam, India. And that created a small group of people who were losers in the global economy. And it was and the difference was that most of us who gained a little bit, but the people who lost a lot. And that meant that they were a very strong and cohesive voice which led to the populist movement you're seeing now in the United States. You're seeing it to a lesser extent in Canada. You're seeing it very clearly in Europe. And that led to Donald Trump. That's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think that is why we are where we are today. That we've been storing up problems for decades, and now those problems are starting to bubble up to the point where we can't just paper over them anymore.
I was just watching a series on Waco and the aftermath of Waco, and what you're saying resonated certainly through the 90s in terms of Ruby Ridge, Waco, the aftermath in Oklahoma City, where we started to pull that thread through that demographic that felt that they were being left out, that they were being not only ignored, but persecuted by their own government. And this, to me, that was, relevant because I was sitting in the newsroom watching all that stuff happen live. Well, 30 years later, here we are, and we're feeling very much the effects of what went on there.
Yeah, and you're seeing it in politics. These people who felt left behind because they were left behind. Let's be honest about it. What should have happened was the government should have said, we're making this change for the good of the economy. We know that you're being left behind. We're going to help you. We're going to step in with training. We're going to help you relocate if necessary. But none of that happened. Governments just waved their hands and said, the magic of the markets will solve it all. And that's not what happened. Instead, those people were basically thrown on the dustbin in the ash heap and said, well, you're on your own. Figure it out.
Well, to be fair and to bring it to present day, that posture really hasn't changed much in Washington, certainly at this stage.
Yeah, that's correct. And, that's a big part of the problem. So you have these people with a burning passion that they've been disadvantaged, that they've been screwed, and they have. So, but their response, their reaction has not been particularly useful, even to themselves. I mean, the things that Trump is doing are not helping his followers. I mean, gasoline prices, the inflation, destroying the alliances that it's taken decades to build up, destroying America's position in the world. None of those are going to help the people who've been left behind. All they're going to do is make life more difficult for everybody. But at this point, it doesn't seem like Trump really cares.
Well, and that is the nature of the beast. I mean, he's playing to type there, and in fact, to some degree, I go back to unimaginable. Well, that's what the president of the United States is right now, and that's where the Americans are. And you caught my eye and ear when I saw your piece on Substack just over a month ago, and this was just after Davos, I guess. And you were commenting on the strategy of Carney versus the strategy of Trump as we head into the free trade review. And I'm probably oversimplifying it, but essentially when you were writing, it was sort of the art of war versus the art of the deal, and both have sort of a legitimate result and outcome. But boy, there's a clash of culture there right off the bat. But if I read it correctly, your view, or you were leaning to suggest that the prime minister is probably on the right track in terms of the tack that he's taking.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, you can never forecast what individuals are going to do. You can forecast crowds more easily than you can forecast individuals. But individuals are erratic, and this one in particular is erratic. So we don't know what's going to happen with the trade negotiations. And let's be clear, the United States is bigger, stronger, and can throw their weight around more than Canada does. Canada's advantage is that it is taking a very technocratic view. It is preparing the ground. It is preparing alternatives. It is setting itself up so that if necessary, it can walk away from the negotiating table without a deal, even though it would be very advantageous not only to Canada, but to the United States to have a deal. So it's a question of, are you going to fly by the seat of your pants and try and throw your weight around, which is what the United States does and Canada couldn't possibly do? Or are you going to try and approach it strategically and think through what could happen and how you're going to reply, which is what Carney is trying to do?
As I sort of watch some of this play out provincially, federally, and then certainly across the border in the U.S., increasingly we are hearing our finance ministers in various regions of the country almost say, well, quite explicitly, Bethlen Falvey in Ontario saying, free trade the boat has sailed. We're not going to be in a free trade world anymore. So to your point, we need to be prepared for whatever the outcome might be, whatever our trade relationship with the United States is going to be. We have to be prepared for the fact that it may not be and likely won't be free trade as we know it.
Well, we've never really had free trade. What we call free trade was freer trade. Let's be clear. Every country cheats on trade, but they all pretend that they're behaving according to the rules. All you have to do is look at, for example, softwood lumber. The United States has objected for years, for decades, about the way Canada charges stumpage fees as opposed to taking royalties on the land. But that's because the lumber companies are logging on Crown land, not private land. And the United States has consistently broken the trade rules, both bilaterally and WTO trade rules, and been ruled against consistently, but consistently goes back and redoes it over and over and over again just because they don't like it. So free trade has always been a myth, but it's been a goal that you would try to achieve. Now, Trump comes along and just knocks over the game board and says, I don't want to play this game. I want to play by my rules, and we're going to do it my way. And because we're so important, you have no choice. And that's not true. Let me give you one example where Canada is creating choice, and that's electric vehicles, EVs. The United States the government has said very clearly, we don't want to go there. We think EVs are a dead end. We want to burn, baby, burn. And that's yesterday's strategy. It's not tomorrow's strategy. You look at the rest of the world outside of North America, and it is very clearly going towards electric vehicles. So what does Canada do? Well, one of the things that Ontario and the federal government are both doing are negotiating with Hyundai to build an EV manufacturing plant in Ontario. And in the background, the parent company to Hyundai also is in the business of building submarines and is trying to sell submarines to the Canadian government. So Canada's playing three or four dimensional chess here, while the United States is trying to figure out how to play tic-tac-toe.
Well, to punctuate that, I mean, based on the emphasis on, non-EVs, the price of gas right now at, $1.60 almost in some cases, and we're looking at that as a result of what's gone on in the Middle East. And while it may be it sound like a leap to pull the thread between what's going on in terms of free trade and what's going on in the Middle East. Certainly, it's a rear view mirror vision in terms of where we're going, in terms of where the oil markets are right now, and we're not quite paralyzed, but we're certainly slowed down and shut down, and the effect on the economy is extraordinary.
Yeah, and there's another aspect of this. When you're talking about EVs and gasoline prices and the where oil is coming from, remember that the United States gets a huge percentage of its oil from Canada. So all of a sudden, security of supply becomes much more important before Trump started bombing Iran. And all of a sudden, being a trusted trade partner is a lot more valuable. So when we sit down across the negotiating table from the Americans on CUSMA, or USMCA as they call it, then all of a sudden being a trusted trade partner is a bigger deal than it was, 3 months ago, 2 months ago.
So, and before we came on, I said I did want to talk about your notes and insights on the Kuzma conversation and Carney's moves, et cetera. But I think it would be remiss if I didn't get your insight and your thought on, sort of, did you see it or should we have seen it coming vis-a-vis what's going on in the Middle East? The Middle East has never been anything you would call close to stable. But in the last 10 days, it's gone way beyond anything that I think, for the most part, most people would have considered possible.
Yeah, I can't say that I saw it coming. or at least not far back. Just before this all started, there were some indications that the United States was actually seriously planning to invade Iraq, to at least bomb Iraq. For example, they moved planes, F-22s, into the region. The United States has never put F-22s into the Middle East before. And F-22s are specifically used to suppress enemy awareness of what you're doing in the air. They take out radar screens. They suppress electronic monitoring, and that's their job. So suddenly, the United States was preparing for that. So, but all that said, that was days before the United States attacked. Did I anticipate that it was going to happen 2 months ago, a month ago? No, I did not. I don't think many people did. Now let's look at why this is happening. I mean, the United States and Iran have been at odds since the Shah was evicted by the U.S. government at the time, and Khomeini was allowed to take over in Iran, creating a theocracy. So, death to America was the rallying cry then, and it's really never faded. So Iran and the United States have been at odds for a long time. And Iran has turned out to be a sponsor of terrorism around the world. So the antagonism between the two countries is not new. What's new is that the Trump administration feels that they have such overwhelming military might that they can reach in and surgically do what they want to do from the air and then go home. Now, that seemed to work in Venezuela, although all they did was they extracted Maduro, and they left the government basically untouched otherwise. So you kind of wonder what they actually accomplished. But they were feeling good about themselves and good about their military posture. So they said, hey, let's take on Iran. And they did. But I don't think they thought beyond the first moves. Yes, they managed to kill the Ayatollah, but they did not decapitate the Iranian government, and they did not suppress military might. So to the point where Iran is now targeting apparently secret U.S. installations with intelligence that they got from Russia. Now, step back and ask yourself, who is one of the major beneficiaries of what has happened, of oil prices going through the roof? Russia. That has been really, John McCain once described Russia as a gas station with an army. And so all of a sudden, Russia is able to sell its petroleum for far more than it was a month ago. And that's going to help them with the Ukraine war. Meanwhile, what has the Trump government done? They have loosened sanctions on Russia. And you have to ask yourself, why? If Russia is feeding intelligence to Iran about how to hurt the United States, why is the United States loosening sanctions on Russia?
Yeah, and those questions, those open-ended questions are more concerning than the answer, I think, sometimes than we get in this case, right? Because at every turn, I mean, last check, there were 14 countries that were somehow involved or engaged in what's going on over there. And again, to your point, Russia kind of the man behind the curtain. But at the same time, there's noise about NATO shooting down missiles that were infringing on Turkish airspace. So this could get out of hand in a hurry with very little warning.
Yes, it could. I mean, you see that it keeps widening. I mean, yesterday Trump said that, I think we're done here, but you don't get to just say, okay, I'm going home. Once you've started a hot war, you're not the only one in charge anymore. It's easy to start, very difficult to stop. And I think they may be starting to realize that. By the way, we haven't mentioned Israel's role in this, or more to the point, Benjamin Netanyahu's role. Clearly, Israel has wanted to get rid of Iran's power for a long time. And this seems like an ideal time to do it, when they have somebody in the White House who is prepared to go ahead and take a shot at it. But Netanyahu, of course, is really in it to try and save his own skin, because if he weren't prime minister of Israel, he'd be in jail. So, you've got people here whose motives are suspect running what could turn out into a very nasty and very widespread war that, if we're unlucky, could even go nuclear.
So, given the current state of the chessboard, as you point out, what would you be telling the corporate world? What would you be telling government in the Western world to do in the near future?
You're assuming that they'd ask me to begin with. You know, I say that deliberately because I have worked with a number of politicians when they were in opposition, and they were delighted to have my help and my thoughts and my analysis and whatever insights I could provide. As soon as they got elected and took over government, I was no longer necessary because they had all these raft of bureaucrats, of civil servants who could do analysis. And so governments don't tend to listen to me, which is fine. It doesn't bother me one way or the other. I'm happy to offer insight, but I'm not trying to push it. But if I were, I would say you should prepare while hoping for the best, you should prepare for the worst. You should prepare for a shooting war that starts to drag Europe into it, which means NATO, which could potentially mean Canada. Now, we're not really in a position where we can do a whole lot at this point because the Canadian military has been run down for so long. And Carney's trying to change that, but you don't turn on those things on a dime. It takes years, if not decades. But it could get very nasty. So what I would say is to governments, prepare for the possibility that you may be dragged into a war. For corporations, I would be less worried about increasing market share and more worried about protecting your financial well-being. This is not a time to be adventurous.
Yeah, the idea of, and that kind of eats on itself. Then, in terms of if the economy starts to take a dump, then people withdraw. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of recession, whatever it might be. So the deeper concerns around war take an even more deeply rooted concern around the economy.
Yeah, and the economy is not exactly robust at the moment, particularly in the United States. What's going on in the United States has been called a K-shaped economy, where the top 20, really the top 10 or 1% of the population are creating all the demand for goods and services, and the bottom 30 or 40% of the population are struggling just to get by. So it looks like the economy is doing well, but that's because the top tier continue to spend. Now, one of the reasons why they're continuing to spend is the stock market does well. And when the stock market does well, people who own stocks feel wealthy, and so they're happier to go out and spend money. If the stock market drops, then they're not as happy anymore. They're not as willing to spend money, and all of a sudden the economy doesn't look as good anymore. So we're facing the possibility that the cosmetic reasons why the economy looks good may be withdrawn, which could make the economy look bad, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The numbers say things are bad, so people say, well, I guess I better pull in my horns, and so things get worse.
Don't you think we're well past the time when we should not all realize that the economy is not the stock market and vice versa, though? I mean,
yeah,
we've been, right?
We should.
We get ourselves into trouble all the time doing that.
We do, and we should do a lot of things, but we still keep stumbling into them. I mean, the stock market is a wonderful barometer, but it's not the weather. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, when you had Pam Bondi shouting at people that the Dow was at 50,000, how dare you question how I'm running the government behavior? And, you think, no, that's not reality. That's just one small part of reality. Not only that, but the stock market isn't the entirety of the financial markets. The real bulk of the financial markets is in the bond market, not the stock market. The stock market is the waves on the surface. The bond market is the ocean.
Richard, it's great of you to join us. And if you don't mind, I might bug you again in coming weeks and months to see how things play out. And I enjoyed our chat today. Thank you.
My pleasure. And I'd be happy to come back. Thanks for inviting me.
Richard Worzel, I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to check out his Substack, and you'll get his insights on where the world's at, where the world's about to go, and how you might want to prepare for it. All right, I'm Dave Trafford. This is Now and Next. Thanks for joining us.